When Link's Awakening was revealed back in February, it was apparent to me that this was a remake of my favorite Game Boy title of the same name. At the same time, I wasn't completely sure if that's what I wanted in a world that existed with direct Zelda sequels using the same universe, in titles like Link Between Worlds, and almost complete reimaginings with the Metroid 2 overhaul Samus Returns. Both of those aforementioned titles managed to not only evoke profound nostalgia over me, but delivered them in a new package. Experiencing something both new and nostalgic at the same time was a sensation that I enjoyed immensely, and was hoping to continue if Nintendo was to ever revisit Link's first Game Boy outing. After replaying the Game Boy title and completing this new version of Link's Awakening, I can now admit that I was wrong in wanting this for that specific title, as Link's Awakening in its original state was always a big console experience held back by the limitations of the Game Boy, and is definitely worthy of a remake on more powerful hardware that allows this game to be what it was always intended to be. Grand. Also, unlike A Link Between Worlds, a sequel to Link to the Past, Link's Awakening would be weakened by a sequel in the same vein because of the impact of the narrative in this game. The most obvious upgrade in Link's Awakening on Switch is the presentation, and Grezzo, along with some new Nintendo staffers on the team, has done a great job reimagining this world in both its sound design and new toy-like graphical style. If the 60s and 70s stop-motion Christmas specials were to be created today, they would have to look like what this team came up with in terms of style on this one. Models look wonderful and seem like a natural extension to the Game Boy style in a way that I could have never imagined on my own. The characters seem super expressive for their toy-like state, and objects in this world like trees manage to look equally as great. It really does feel like you're staring into a diorama throughout most of your adventure. The environments benefit from an immersive lighting system that puts some hyper-realistic games to shame. Water gleams in the sun, and the walls glow if near a source of fire. For as good as the game looks in this form, the opening cinematic looks even better. It's given an animated introduction that truly rivals anything I've seen released in other media, and when I boot up the game, I almost never skip it. I've always believed that due to the original release's graphical limitations, that the developers really tried to make up for it with their musical score. So what you get in Link's Awakening is a soundtrack that's more grandiose and punchy than modern Zelda soundtracks, that have the advantage of showing you the scope of the adventure ahead by using its visuals. For example, when peering off the Great Plateau for the first time in Breath of the Wild, you know you're in for an epic journey because the visual cues convey that back to the player. Here, however, the audio cues attempt to translate that same emotion back to the players. With the original release, the music really packed the epicness of the adventure from start to finish, where the Game Boy couldn't visibly show you as well as it could on more powerful hardware. As a result of this, Link's Awakening Switch has inherited, in my opinion, one of the best original soundtracks the series has ever offered, and with the upgraded visuals, I feel like the team could take more liberties with the arrangements offered from the Game Boy titles. There are still instances where I personally prefer the original chiptune track over the new scores here, for example like with the Mysterious Forest. The original version was more jazzy and groovy, where this new rendition is more hip-hop infused. Then there's the dungeon themes in this remake, and let me tell you, they are fantastic. Most of them use the chiptune tracks as a base and layer it in with an orchestral arrangement to create absolute magic that not only stays faithful to the original composition, but manages to modernize it in a very creative way. The level 6 dungeon, Face Shrine, manages to build off the original chiptune track in a way that will elicit sorrow in a momentous way with its haunting interpretation of an already classic. If you haven't already played this game, then for me to spoil the story for you would be robbing you of one of the greatest tales ever spun in the Zelda lore. If you've already experienced it though, then you know what I'm talking about. Experiencing it here, however, still managed to impact me the same way it did many years ago. Maybe I'm older, or maybe the new expressiveness of the characters in this remake allowed me to sympathize with their story more than I ever did before. And the characters in this game are some of the most charming cast to ever grace a Zelda title. Marin, the Zelda stand-in for this game, is not royalty. It seems like she's more on Link's level. You can feel the kinship between the two characters as they interact, and I think some might even interpret Marin as a love interest of Link's. Most of the other characters in this game are weirdos and oddballs, and I love them, and find them very endearing. You won't find Zelda in this story or most of the other Zelda story conventions, including the Triforce. It's wholly unique and is as refreshing and engaging as other Zelda titles that took liberties with the story, with games like Majora's Mask. Link's Awakening was the first game in the series to follow up A Link to the Past, a game which would chart the course for the series up until Breath of the Wild's release, and it did not let the hardware get in the way of its ambitions, even if it would be to its own detriment. Link's Awakening is an adventure that demands 4 face buttons, and despite the limitations of the Game Boy's 2 face buttons, it seems like the developers made the game they wanted to make anyway, without compromising their vision to limited hardware. What you get with the original release is a whole lot of menu surfing to swap out your gear as you traverse Koholint Island, even disarming Link if necessary. With the 4 face buttons and the shoulder buttons on the Switch, Link always has a sword, shield, and Pegasus boots equipped at all times, lowering the number of times that you have to open the menu considerably. There are other quality of life improvements implemented in the game to further improve your overall experience. Warping in the Game Boy version would shuffle you through all the available locations until you reached your desired destination. This time around, you have access to the map and simply choose where you want to warp. Also, this version of Koholint Island is seamless, no longer locked to a screen-by-screen grid from the original. I don't know if I would refer to this as an improvement though, as maybe it was more of a design choice, and the game doesn't seem to really benefit from it much, except for when charging the Pegasus boots. The openness of the world does have some drawbacks, however, as when approaching crowded spaces or exiting interior buildings, the frame rate will occasionally chug along, even appearing to drop in half. This is nowhere near game-breaking by any stretch, and might break your immersion if anything. With Grizzle's previous work on the series, quality of life improvements were some of the only new additions added to their remakes, outside of the improved visuals. They built this title from the ground up, and there's a wealth of new features to enjoy this time around. Bottles have been added to stored fairies in, and give you another collectible for you completionists out there to obtain. Mini games have been beefed up too. Like in the fishing game, you can hook yourself a bottle this go around, and farm rupees as a bonus reward for handing over your catches. The crane game from the original title was a one-and-done mini-game for me. In that game, here however, I found myself repeatedly visiting it to earn Mario-themed figurines to place around Mabe Village. Also, there are more hearts to obtain this time around, which is always fun to collect in any Zelda game. Link's Awakening can be a bit easy though, so having the ability to gain 20 hearts can make your experience even easier. Good news there however, because if you're wanting a challenge, hero mode can be selected right from the start. With double the damage taken and limited healing options, it's sure to add a little extra challenge to any Zelda veteran. The biggest new addition to the game would have to be Dampé's Shack in the Chamber Dungeon. Here you rearrange rooms from various dungeons from the main quest in a way that fits a certain criteria of Dampé. He may ask you to build a dungeon in the shape of a heart, or even build one only using rooms with stairs. I personally didn't enjoy this mode that much, and it just kind of felt like tacked in filler. I wasn't offended by it though, as the chamber dungeons are completely optional. This is a faithful recreation of the Game Boy title at the end of the day, and this world is brought over untouched for the most part. Link's Awakening was marketed as a direct sequel to Link to the Past, a game that had refined the formula from the NES Zelda, and the stretcher from that game is carried over to Awakening. You're gonna navigate a world and partake in side quests to gain access to one of 8 dungeons, to gather 8 things, grabbing items along the way way that will allow you to advance further into the map. The dungeons may remind you of other dungeons in the franchise, however I would say that they're a little less predictable on how you progress through them. In most Zelda games, the items obtained in that dungeon is the key to solving most of the puzzles within it, and it's necessary for beating the boss. That's not the case here though, and you'll find yourself using Link's entire arsenal throughout your journey, more so than in other Zelda games, and you never know what item will be used to defeat the boss, leaving you to experiment more than you would in other titles. Combat in Awakening is pretty much one-to-one with Link to the Past. Link can charge his sword for a spin attack, chuck bombs, and shoot arrows. There are some standouts here though, like the Roc's Feather that allows Link to jump, which at the time of the original release was new for the character. Moblin, Keys, and other Zelda baddies make their return to Awakening, but this game is of course known for its Mario crossovers. Shy Guys, Goombas, and Spinies will try to thwart Link's path, and Kirby even makes an appearance, but don't expect him to be friendly. Koholint Island is one of the smaller Zelda maps in the series, but nearly every inch of it has something for Link to do. There might be an interesting character to meet, and a seashell or heart piece to discover, an item to be traded, or maybe a small puzzle to solve before you can advance. It's dense and packed with a ton to do, and almost no screen is squandered of an opportunity for something for you to engage in. The pacing of this game is almost perfect, but that doesn't mean that this almost 30-year-old game doesn't have some design issues. Tal Tal Mountain is mostly what I'm referring to. When navigating this area in the original game, it felt punishing to walk off the beaten path and search for seashells or hearts, and you would often find yourself back at the bottom of the mountain, only to go through the same caves over and over again until you were ready to progress to the dungeon. There really wasn't much they could do to fix this without changing the entire structure of it, and it is preserved here with all of its flaws. It's a small portion of the game, but I didn't want to not mention it. And for the most part, Koholint Island is a fun world to explore. Link's Awakening was the first Zelda title I ever completed, and it propelled me into a franchise that I would forever love, and now it's preserved in a state worthy of its own ambitions that could not be fully realized 26 years ago. We're giving Link's Awakening a 4.7 out of 5.
Sleepers wake, dreams will fade, although we cling fast. Was it real, what we saw?